Cry for me, cry for yesterday, cry for me, cry for me, cry for yesterday, cry for me, high above the clouds.
Hi, I'm Justin Coletti from SonicScoop. Thanks for coming to MixCon. I want to introduce you to our next presenter. I'm really excited about this one. This is a guy who has worked with so many artists that I grew up listening to. I mean, I look back on my teenage years and I'm like, I love that band, I love that band, I love that band. We're talking about Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Erykah Badu. Too many artists to mention. Let's give a big warm welcome to Mr. Bob Power, please. Bob is going to be walking us through a real mix that he brought in, and he's going to take us through his entire process. Not only is Bob an amazing engineer and amazing mixer, but he's also a great educator who's been teaching for a long time at the Clive Davis Institute at NYU. So we're really super thrilled to have him. Just want to give a shout out to our sponsors for this event. The reason that MixCon is free for you guys to attend, and the reason that's free for you to watch at home on YouTube is because of our sponsors. And the sponsors for this event, one of my favorite plug-in companies, Sound Toys. We can give a big round of applause for Sound Toys. Thanks to those guys, this is completely free. And we really appreciate you being here for MixCon. I'm going to get off stage and hand it over to Bob.
Thank you. I just want to talk a little bit before we start about what mixing really is. These guys wanted me to get right into it and say, this is how I do the kick drum, and I can see them at the back, rogue presenter. But I want to talk for just a minute about what mixing really is. You know, fundamentally, mixing is about musical balances and tonal balances. And by tonal balances, musical balances are obvious. By tonal balances, I mean the hopefully somewhat natural distribution of the frequency content in the instruments that are represented in the mix, which gets towards the idea of a great arrangement will make a great mix, as you guys probably know. If you're fighting the arrangement, if people haven't apportioned those frequency areas properly by using the right instruments pitched in the same way, right way with the right timbre, you're fighting an uphill battle. And I think that's what a lot of us do at least half the time, is sort of trying to untangle something that might have been arranged a little bit better to begin with. But so be it, that's what it is. But again, musical balances, which are obvious, tonal balances, which is, again, a very complementary and pleasant distribution of the frequency content between the different instruments, so the listening experiences becomes pleasurable purely from a sonic point of view. You know, creating a vibe is important, and I'll be honest with you. Often if you create a deep enough vibe, you don't have to worry about all the other stuff I talked about, because that's what's really important. But yeah, creating a vibe. And seeing the artist and producer's vision. I can't emphasize that enough. If you're mixing for yourself, that's one thing, but if you're mixing for other folks, it's not for you. It's not for you, and you really need to go to the wall in several ways. To A, try to suss out what really the artist and producer had in mind, and then B, through your own chops, try to elevate that and take that to a level that they kind of didn't really imagine that it could go there. But it's real important to remember that it is not for you. If you're mixing, you're in service of the music, the producer, and the artist. And then this sounds real mundane, but the X factor. Can I hear everything? I know that sounds really kind of mundane, but that's what I've been fighting all my life. Wow, I labor under the assumption that if somebody put something in a production that they meant it so you heard it. Now, it has to be in the right proportion, but I'm assuming that they put it there so you would hear it. I've been wrong, but just can I hear everything can become a lifetime question in itself. And if you can put together a mix where you can actually hear all the elements, meaning that they're in the proper perspective, but you can still hear everything, you're probably going to be pretty far ahead of the game. You're probably going to be doing pretty well. Now, some things will be darker, some things will be smaller, some things will be bigger, but if you can hear all those things, it's like, wow, that's really something in itself. It's tough when you start thinking about the tonal balances, the musical balances, the artist's vision, the producer's vision. Can I hear everything? Did they intend to hear everything? It becomes a pretty complex matrix pretty quickly. And then there's the vibe factor, which I have to say I suffered for a long time feeling that if everything else was together, that the mix would be great, but the vibe was suffering. Ideally, the vibe is going to be in the production. You shouldn't have to invent the vibe in the mix, but it doesn't always work that way. And in a perfect world, what you want to do is enhance the vibe that's already there. Take whatever vibe and elevate it, magnify it 4 times. Another thing, just to get our definitions together, you can think about the dimensions of a mix in 3 ways. Top to bottom, which is frequency content. Side to side, which is your stereo field, and front to rear, which is the depth of the mix. And the depth of the mix, the last one is really the toughest one. Top to bottom to get a pleasing complementary set of frequencies for all the instruments to exist in, where it's pleasant to listen to. That's tough enough. Left and right, the stereo field, well, it's kind of an easier proposition. There's a reason we don't put the kick drum and the snare drum hard right, because it takes away the glue of the rhythm section and the punch of the rhythm section. Front to rear is a little bit more difficult, and we legislate the front to rear dimension of the mix via ambience generators, volume, and timbre, of all things. Generally, as something we forget, but in nature, as things get farther away from you, they generally get a little bit darker. There's a reason why, when you saw the cartoons where someone's in the canyon and they go, hello, 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 hello. Well, you got to remember that as those things die away, they don't just get quieter, they actually get darker also, which is one of the reasons why a lot of delays had high frequency roll-offs, so each iteration of the delay would get a little bit darker. And again, it's not like what happens in nature is everything, because no, we're making a record here. We can do things you cannot do in nature. But again, knowing the issues of perception and front to rear perception, what makes something sound farther away, there's going to be a timbral element to that. There's going to be a volume element to that, and then there's going to be an ambience element to that. Now, the ambience you can think of as the ratio of direct versus reflected sound that you're hearing. And you do that by how much you're sending to the reverb, how much you're sending to the delay. But again, think about those 3 dimensions of the mix. And really, the last one, the front to rear dimension, is where things get really, really interesting, because you should be able to listen to a mix. It should not be like a flat piece of paper. It should almost, it's kind of like televisions now. I have a 4K TV in the city. I guess it's LED. It's real cool, but I tell you, I don't know how you guys feel. It's a little weird for me because I see this layer here, this layer here, this layer here, this layer here, and there seem to be all these discrete layers going back rather than the plasma, which I have upstate, which looks more like film, where you have that smooth gradation of things. Just there's no layers, there's only depth there, and I think that's one of the things we want to work towards in our front to rear dimension of the mix. I'm looking at my notes, truths. They really are going rogue presenter, but this stuff is important. Again, it's not for you. is for the producer and the artist. Not that you don't bring your own thing to it, because that's why they came to see you. Careful of reference tracks, okay? Sometimes somebody will do a track and they play a Katy Perry track for me. They want it to sound like that. I'm sorry, you're not Katy Perry. You didn't have the best people in the world working on this production who are really, really good at what they do. You can't tell them that. But that's just a hazard of when people say, well, yeah, I want it to sound like this. Well, you're not Al Green, I'm sorry, you know. But some of the things that you want to start thinking about in terms of what your clients want from you, or what you want from yourself, because a lot of times you've been mixing your own stuff, you can think of splashy. We know what splashy sounds like. Deep, mysterious, vibey, punchy. In truth, you really often have to suss that out yourself, because your clients won't be able to tell you that. How many of you guys mix for other clients? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, so I'm not wasting my breath here. You know, ultimately, a great recording is a compelling performance of a great song, right? Those two things have to be there before you have a great record. Whether you like what he does or not, James Taylor could make a great record on a phone because he gives compelling performances of great songs. And a lot of times what we do during the course of production and mixing is trying to elevate it, trying to get it to another level where it really becomes more compelling. I'm looking down my notes here. How many of you trust your monitors? Fewer hands than what I did before. Yeah, it's key, guys. You know, it's really key. And to be honest, there's a couple things you want from monitors. The term flat is bullshit. It's like nothing is flat. What is flat? I don't want flat. I want to know what's there without any exaggeration of any particular area. So ideally, you know, the most important thing for your monitors is that they reveal everything that's there to you. You don't want to work real hard on something, get somewhere else, and find out there was an anomaly there that you actually weren't able to hear on your speakers. The good news is that there's a lot of great monitors way under $10,000 now. You know, there's a whole class of stuff now, really between $1,000 and $3,000 that are really pretty good. But get to know and trust your monitors. It is your ears. Those are the most important things you have. And again, rather than being good or flat, it's much more important that you know them well and you know how the stuff will translate. Back in the 70s, guys used to mix on, there was a stereo speaker manufacturer called AR, and there were guys who mixed on AR-17s, these little stereo speakers with a 6 or an 8-inch woofer, 2-inch tweeter. Some people mix on Oratones. Some very heavy-duty mixers mix on Oratones, but they know the response of the speaker and they know how the stuff will translate. So that's super important. And in fact, if you don't trust your monitors, then that should probably be at the top of your save up for list. What do we have as our building blocks? What do we have as our tools? You know, really, there's two things in audio manipulation. There are gain control devices and there are ambience generators. That's it. Now, by gain control device, you say, well, what about an EQ? Well, an EQ is a gain device. It just boosts or cuts a very specific area in the frequency spectrum, but it's still a gain device. You know, you say gain control, everyone immediately thinks of compression. Well, yeah, but also there's a fader. It's a gain control device. And there's compression, and there's an equalizer. Again, it boosts or cuts a very specific frequency area. Ambience generators, reverbs, delays, flangers, choruses. Pitch shifters kind of come into that. There are pitch effects too. But when it really comes down to it, those are the only things you have at your disposal. Gain control devices and ambience generators. Pitch-based effects, to a certain degree, I put in under ambience generators. You know, what do we do with these things? hopefully, number one, create a tonally pleasing sound, something that when you listen to it, besides the music coming across to you well, is really pleasant to listen to. And if it's boomy and if it's Jeep stuff and it's meant to be like that, it's going to be pleasant to listen to on that level. If it's a Barbra Streisand record, sorry, Mick, and it's real shiny and beautiful and pinpoint, and you know, that's what that thing is supposed to be, and it's very pleasant to listen to on that level. So again, is it tonally pleasing to listen to given the context of what the music is? In a way, it should reflect the natural sound of the instrument, but in this day and age, that's way down on the totem pole of importance because nothing is natural these days anymore. If you're doing a jazz record, yeah. Removing unpleasant artifacts. Okay, that's a big one to me. Removing EQ areas that when a certain pitch comes up, all of a sudden it gets really tanky and then goes away when that pitch or that dynamic level changes. Yeah, we want to kind of take those things away. And a de-esser is a perfect example of that as well. You know, digital is really unkind to sibilants. We know this. It seems to make it worse. Digital also, to me, seems to accentuate the anomalies in the different dynamic and pitch ranges of a person's voice. You know how a lot of singers will sound very even, real good studio singers sound super even tonally and dynamically throughout the whole range of their singing. But for the rest of us, a lot of times when someone sings high, it'll sound real nasal and squeaky, and then they sing low and it sounds real dark and boomy. Well, we want to try to take away those anomalies from getting in the way of our listening experience. And then to have the elements work in the genre and the context of the track, okay? And this is all the same stuff that I was talking about before, but the genre is important, and I'm definitely going to get onto some techniques in just a second, but the genre is really important. People ask me, well, what's your first line of defense when you think about where you're going with a mix? I have to say it's genre, and the sonic emphases of different kinds of songs are really very genre dependent. When I was coming up, I had a couple of different careers scoring TV and stuff before I started engineering. So when I first started engineering, it was in the mid-'80s, and I was doing a lot of dance records in the early days of hip-hop. Then somebody brought in a jazz record. So I mixed the jazz record, and because I'd been doing a lot of hip-hop, the kick drum was king, right? Man, did I mess that up. If you guys know anything about jazz, the kick drum's like, you know, in hip-hop, it's right here. In jazz, it's way back there somewhere. So genre is really, really important. What works for one type of music doesn't work for another one. You know, I wrote, carve up the frequency spectrum to hear things in a mix. Yeah, make room for other things, okay? I'll get into something in just a minute about resonant peaks. Most instruments, because of the anomalies of the recording process and the instruments themselves, most instruments have a resonant peak. It often changes with the pitch of the instrument, but it's often there throughout the different pitch ranges. And what you can do is raise up an EQ with a medium Q, not real wide like that, not too tight, just about like that, and then start sweeping it. And all of a sudden, you'll get to a point where you'll hear this thing come up like that, and you'll back off, and it'll disappear again. Well, you've just found the resonant peak. And I guarantee you, especially in the low end of things, especially between 400 and 100 hertz. If you do that with everything in your mix before you actually get to work, is sweep that EQ and find that resonant peak where it really comes up like that, and just pull that back in just a little bit, all of a sudden there'll be so much more room for everything else because those resonant peaks won't be masking the other instruments. It's a big one. It works really well. And again, you'll do a lot less boosting because you've cut out the things that are getting in the way of the tonal uniformity of the instrument, rather than trying to make up for it with a boost here and a boost here, and you're boosting everywhere except that resonant peak. If you go and take that resonant peak and pull it down a little bit, everything else will be a lot more evenly represented. Do you need to boost? You know, I used to read about guys like real experienced heavy engineers, and they say, I hardly ever boost EQs. I almost always cut. And I was like, wow, I could never do that. I don't know how they do that. And you know what? Now I find myself cutting almost all the time and doing very, very little boosting. If you can get to that, you'll find that your mixes will sound a lot smoother, a lot less harsh, a lot less lumpy. You know, yeah, you got to boost the low end sometimes if you want a little hump on the kick or the bass in a certain area. And yes, if you want a little more tap on the kick, if you kick up 3K a little bit, it'll give you a little more tap. That's something you're not going to get via cutting. But particularly with high frequency, it's going to be a lot smoother if you actually get rid of all the mid-range and low end that's making it sound boomy in that area. And if you pull that away, you'll find that the high end that's left is a lot sweeter and smoother than if you crank up 5K, which will take the enamel off your teeth, you know, pretty quickly. High pass and low pass. There's a whole school, and there are a lot of heavyweight mixers that send their assistant in the room before they go to work. And every element in the mix, they high pass and or low pass to take away anything that doesn't need to be there before they go to work. And particularly high passing is really, really important because there's a lot of, not subharmonic, but bass harmonic information below, let's say, 150 or 200 hertz, that it really adds up. When you listen to one thing by itself, you go, oh, that's not too much of that. But when you have 20 of those things with a lot of spurious information below 150 hertz that doesn't really need to be there, it really starts to cloud things up. So think about going in before you go to work, high pass or low pass, everything, and this is the way you do it. Say with a high pass filter, you take the high pass, you play the instrument, you loop it, and as soon as you start to encroach into the bottom of where you want, you find you lose that bottom like that, then back off till you get what you want again, but leave everything below that out of there, because that stuff really adds up and you'll be fighting that cloudiness a lot. Same thing with low passing. Not everything needs to be bright, and in fact, if there's a lot of 2500, 3K on a bass guitar, I'm not so sure if that frequency area is going to help me define the function of what a bass is actually supposed to be doing in a track. So think about that before you get into work. Gain control. Okay, everybody thinks about compression as it keeps things from getting too loud. Kinda. I mean, that's the radio station thing. You know why compressors first got built, right, for radio stations? Apparently, I'm not real technical like this, but back in the 20s and 30s, if too much voltage got sent to the radio station transmitter, the transmitter would actually blow up. I mean, there'd be sparks and fire and the whole thing. So that's where compressors first got started and why they were invented in the first place, to keep things from getting too loud too quickly. Personally, I think compression does a couple of different things in a modern pop context. Number one, it helps us keep a constant presence on something. And you know, it's not good or bad, but it's the sound of a pop record that we're used to things having a particular presence in a track, and that doesn't change. It doesn't drift away too much and come back and drift away. If it's meant to sound like that, it does, but it's always right there. Well, compression guarantees a constant presence in a track. The other thing that compression does for me, and particularly with vocals that I think is really important, is it enhances the detail of the low-level stuff. Okay? I often compress not for what it does to the loud parts, but because it's clamping down on the loud parts, I can hear all the real soft stuff. And that's where a lot of the real expressive stuff in a vocal goes on, all those little inside things that happen inside on a vocal. So it enhances the low-level detail. You can hear all the low-level stuff. The other thing we use it for is envelope modification, right? Modifying the attack, sustain, decay, elements of a sound, and most of that's done with percussion stuff and usually with drums, but it can be done with guitars and bass too. Let me put up a couple other things. Again, many of you, it seemed like most of you actually mix for outside clients. Tuning, it's not your job. It's a producer's job. It's not your job to sit there and tune somebody's vocal. It's not your job to figure out how far you should go on that before it sounds unnatural and takes all the life out of something. You know, so no, I'm sorry, don't sit there and tune somebody's vocals for them. That's the producer's job. Occasionally, if I get a track and they wanted a real smooth R&B background thing where it was real lush and smooth, yeah, occasionally I'll auto-tune some of the background vocals there just to give it that lushness, because no matter what you do, if it's not really in tune, you'll never make it sound super lush. Try not to, speaking of auto-tune, try not to slap it on and just put it on one setting. Personally, I use Melodyne, especially for my lead stuff, and I go through it note at a time. I do it by hand. I don't do it by the grid. I do it by my ear, because every singer has their comfort level. Singers, you know, the range of an acceptable in-tune pitch is like this. Everyone thinks that this is in tune. No, there's a range like this, and every instrumentalist or singer has their comfort zone about where they live. And if you've ever tuned a segment of a performance, what ends up happening is the stuff that you don't tune starts sounding really weird because you've taken the singer out of their sort of comfort zone on the pitch level. But one other thing about, you know, and again, DSP and conserving your resources is an issue these days, less so all of the time. Now the computers are much more powerful and plugins are much more efficient. But it's a good idea not to put auto-tune on and just leave it on. I render it to audio and then disable the auto-tune so the computer doesn't have to work so hard. It'll save you a lot of DSP. Everything will run a little bit smoother. Just couple more things. Organization. Professionals things don't happen to professionals. Oh shit, it just happened. I don't know what happened. No, that does not happen. How many guys back up? I don't see enough hands. Guys, always have 2 drives hooked up to your computer. Always when you're working. Your A drive and your B drive. Work to your A drive, and at the end of the day, back up to the B drive. Do it every day. Do not even think twice about it. Don't do drag and drop. Don't use Time Machine. Time Machine is really good for system-wide backups, but it's real lousy for file-specific backups. ChronoSync I use. It's a great utility. Carbon Copy Cloner or ChronoSync. 2 backup utilities that basically, ChronoSync lets you say, I want you to copy from the Backbone folder, I'm working with a band called Backbone right now, on drive A, and copy that. Anything that's new to the Backbone folder on drive B lets you save that as a document on the desktop. So if I worked on Backbone that day, and I'm ready to leave, I just double-click on that, I say go, it copies all the stuff over, okay? Can't emphasize that enough. And I know you know that you should back up, but you need to do it every single day, and you need to have 2 drives hooked up to your computer all the time. Save version numbers. Every time you do a major amendment to a mix, save it as 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. It's sort of leaving a trail of crumbs. How many of you guys have ever done something and realized that it was much better 4 versions ago? Yeah, it lets you go back and import stuff from those earlier versions real easily. It also allows you, when you send stuff out to your clients, you have a mix called I Love You Baby Baby 1.3. They send you notes on that. I have a spreadsheet, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, but it's a good idea to keep a spreadsheet with your current working versions, your client's comments on a particular version, and then what you did to change it, and then what the new version is. And send those comments back to your clients. If your clients write you and say, I feel like we're losing this lead vocal at times, I feel like there's too much reverb on the lead vocal, the kick drum isn't punchy enough, I copy and paste that stuff to a text document, and when I send them the revised mix, I put little check marks by those things and send them that text document back. 2 things. Number 1, it keeps me straight and makes sure that I actually address those things, and it'll bring up the confidence factor of your clients, and they really will think that you are listening to them and care. Anyway, it's, in a way it's manipulative, but in a way it's not. You know, you really, The trust of your clients that you're actually there to do the right thing by them is super, super important. That's what people will come to you for. You know, we all get better at our own rate and our own pace, and sometimes it's faster, and sometimes you'd be doing this for 35 years and you still go home feeling like shit. Yeah, it happens to all of us. But it's really important that your clients know that you'll go to the wall for them. I have to say, I'm pretty good at what I do, but I really feel like my career is a result of my clients knowing that I will work much harder than they will. Okay, enough of that stuff. Esther Rada, I mixed and mastered her first, well, the first record that I had of hers. It wasn't her first record, which was Nina Simone covers, but completely reimagined with like Afrobeat horn arrangements, incredibly, the best musicians in Israel, incredible rhythm section. The drummer sounded like Steve Gadd. It was great. It was really, really good. And super clean and super defined, so all I really had to do was direct traffic and make sure the music came off in a very dynamic fashion because it was traditional arrangements with traditional orchestrations, great players playing the right parts on the right instruments. It was wonderful. She sent me a record about a year ago to mix that was really, really different. And she worked with not a minimalist, but a very different kind of producer in Israel, a guy named Shuz. And he uses real kind of squonky sounds, doesn't fill in all the cracks, and you'll hear that in this. He kind of leaves. It's not this stuff where the rhythmic feel is super smooth and super funky all the time. It's kind of what I call the jerky funk. But that's his thing, and that's how it worked. Every mix you get, you sort of have to do triage right away. You have to assess, what does this mix need and what am I up against? Well, with this stuff, it was how to make very few elements sound as big as possible, each one. The track count was very low on this. There may have been 30 voices, maybe. And a lot of those were doubles of stuff where, you know, they put 5 mics on the piano. Thanks, I just really, one decent stereo mic would do just fine. But they had a mono mic, they had a mic in the bathroom on the piano, you know. So, again, because there weren't a lot of elements going on, I thought, all right, what you really have to do is make those elements sound a lot bigger and a lot punchier and very dynamic, which is not what people usually think of me as, you know. But that was my assessment. Let me play you some of the stuff, and then we'll start to deconstruct it. It sounds horrible up here. If it sounds really horrible out there, raise your hand, because I'm getting the slap off the back wall. Little delay.
Cry for me, cry for yesterday, cry for me, cry for me, cry for yesterday, cry for me. High above the clouds, we're both toes they cannot touch, and a few years in between. In this stupid game we both can twin. I've been away, had to go to save a soul. I've been away when I was too young to really know that I've been away. And I don't know what you're doing. Are you sorry for the time that we've lost? I've been away. All the time I've been thinking about you. I've been away. In my heart I always found you. I've been away, yeah. And then we can be in blue. Everything to satisfy you. Cry for me. Cry for yesterday. Cry for me. Cry for me.
That wasn't me,
Cry for
that's them.
yesterday. Cry for me. High on that shady porch, as the dancer front of the king's horse, ashamed of wisdom of the way. Now me and not, you cannot really say I've been away, had to go to save a soul. I've been away, I was too young to really know that I've been away. Don't know what you're doing. yesterday. Cry for me, cry for yesterday. Cry for yesterday.
So you can see I didn't turn that up, by the way, that was them in the middle. You can see there's not really that much going on, but the vibe in this, what I took as the important thing was how to give those things a lot of emphasis and make them sound real punchy and dynamic. Also, how to make the groove elements work, because they're a little unusual. I'm going to just start moving a little faster and deconstruct a lot of this. Let me find my instrumental masters. By the way, you should work with instrumental group masters, meaning that you should have all your drums end up, after all the routing you do, all the drums and effects come out through one stereo bus that's called drums. Bass, guitars, keys, background vocals, effects and scratches or whatever, pads, lead vocals. You should have a single fader that represents all those things. There's a bunch of different advantages to that, including, number one, it's a lot easier to drop stems that way. Number two, you can make adjustments to the overall level of those instrumental groupings without having to go into a bunch of little tiny faders and move this up a little, move that up a little. You say, wow, I think the drums need to be a little louder. Great, let me just move up that drum master a little bit. Plus, it allows you to put EQ across those group masters. Often it's like, wow, this sounds really great. The drums aren't just quite bright enough. Well, do you want to go into each individual drum and brighten it up and worry about if you're doing it too much or this, or is it changing the sound too much, or just go to your drum group and open up the top a little? It's a lot easier to do things that way. So you can see I have kit master, bass master, key master, background master, lead vocal master. One other thing about this that's super important. Try to have your ambiances discrete to the instrumental grouping that they are active on, meaning that your drum reverb only used for your drums and have that come out of the drum master bus. Your lead vocal reverbs and delays, only use those on the lead vocals and have those come out the lead vocal bus. What that does is several things. Number one, when it's time to print an a cappella or instrumental, you just mute that stuff and you're fine. The other thing is, you know how sometimes you solo a vocal and you go, wow, that's really great, except I'm hearing the snare drum in the vocal reverb? It takes that away. So if you have the DSP, try to keep your ambience generators discrete to the instrumental grouping that they're on. And again, you don't have problems like you drop an a cappella and you hear the snare drum a little in the vocal reverb. It'll take that away, because that sucks when that happens. So let me mute these guys, and let's start at the core, which is the drums. I'm sorry, I'm an R&B guy. That's the way I think. One of the weird things about this mix is if there is a kick drum, I don't know if it's very prominent. There are toms that take the function of the kick. Let's see. He called them toms. It's serving the function of a kick. It does have the resonance of a tom, which is actually a problem. I don't think I've ever done a track with acoustic drums where it's been toms playing throughout, where it hasn't been a nightmare because of the build-up resonance of those things and the masking that does. I'm trying to think if these are actually live toms or not. Let's take a listen and see. Yeah, it is. It is. So let's see how I dealt with the main one here. Wow, not doing too much. I should be high passing and I'm not. And I lied about the boosting. I am boosting. Oh, but you know what's interesting, guys? I'm doing a shelf, but starting at 500. So really everything from the sort of mid-range through the upper mid-range, I'm taking up just to get a little more definition in the drum. Without it, With it. Yeah, you can hear the attack on it much better like that. Let's see, he had another mic on it, and C4M, I guess that's a microphone overhead. Let's listen to that by itself. Oh, that's helpful. I didn't do anything to that because it didn't need it, but it helps the definition. Without it, yeah, that's really nice. I didn't do anything because I didn't have to. It's all mid-range and upper mid-range, so it really helps define the kick a little bit. Let's see what this is about. Why did I put a modulation delay on this? There's another, there's a RCA, it was a ribbon mic on the same toms. Let's take a listen to that. I have a feeling I put a very short couple of millisecond delays to deal with the phase of that. It might have sounded a little phasey against the originals. I may have made it a little longer to give it, yeah, it's meant to be an ambient mic, and it took away some of the phase problems. Let's see what else. Okay, now I've routed these things to a bus that I called Tom Beat, and I'm using an 1176. What am I doing that for? Probably just to punch it up a little bit, and what I wanted to do was accentuate the attack. Yeah, so I have the slowest attack I can and the fastest release I can. By the way, fast attacks on compressors are the quickest way to take all the life out of your music. Now, I'll tell you, you put a fast attack, people say, how fast? I don't know. The knob is over here. But say 10, 15 milliseconds on a vocal. What you'll find is the vocal will always sit in place, but you take all the inner life out of it. You've done gain control, so you can always hear it just perfectly, but you've taken all that inner push out of the vocal. What you want to do is enhance what that singer meant to be doing, but give it a constant presence in the track. And again, fast attacks, you'll always hear it, but you'll take away any of the push that singer had going on. Now this, again, is very slow attack, very fast release. Reason the release is so fast is because the beat's really active, and I want the compressor to recover back to zero before the next hit comes. The other thing is a fast release on percussive elements kind of brings up the raucous nature of it. It just makes it waffle a little bit more in a good way. Let's take a listen. Without the compressor, with it, yeah, definitely makes it a little bit more exciting. And again, very slow attack to let the attack go through. Very fast release, so when it acts, it comes back to zero before the next hit hits. You'll see if I slow down the release, it basically just takes the drums and turns them down because it's a very active beat and the compressor never has time to come back to unity gain. Watch. Fast release, much more dynamic now. Again, because by the time the next hit hits, you want that compressor to come back to zero. Very slow attack. Now, how does a slow attack modify the envelope? Well, what happens is it lets the natural attack of the instrument come through and then clamps down on it. Now, it hasn't really made that attack louder. That would be an expander. But it gives you the impression that that attack is more pronounced because the level of the attack compared to the sustain level is greater. You're basically taking down the sustain level, so it's going to seem like the attack is enhanced. Does that make sense? But definitely ups the excitement factor. Again, without it. With it. Now that's a sucker punch because it got louder too. It always sounds better. But definitely it sounds a lot punchier, a lot more dynamic. Let's see. I then bust that to another stereo bus called Toms and Ambience. I guess, I don't know why I did that. But I did some more corrective EQ at that point. Let's take a listen. I'll explain this curve. Can you guys see this? Pretty weird, but I'll show you in a sec. Without it, wow. Huge difference, right? Before I start messing with this, let me save the setting as 1 so we can get back to it. Let me explain what I did here. I'm boosting at 100 to really get the bigness of the bottom, right? But I'm also doing what I call a poor man's high-pass filter below it. Again, this is a 6-band parametric, so there's no filter on the low end. But you know what? If you pull way down like this at 31, there's nothing below that. So it's going to act like a high-pass filter with this curve right here. And if I take that off, you'll see it gets real woofy real quickly. The low-end resonance. Woo! Thanks, guys. Again, anytime you boost, how many things are you going to want to boost the low end on? Kick drum, bass guitar, what else? Sorry? Yeah, that kind of stuff. As a rule of thumb, again, I'm not perfect and this doesn't always work, but as a rule of thumb, generally if I boost low end, say around 100 or 80 hertz, I'll almost always high pass it below that. Because there's not a lot of that sub stuff that you're really interested in, especially with something that's this active. If it's an 808 that goes boom, boom, every once in a while, yeah, you can get away with having all that 40 and 50 hertz in there, and you can actually hear it. With something like this, boom, 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 boom. If you have 50 hertz in there, all it's going to turn into is this kind of drone that's going to really mask your low end. Another thing, I'm giving away all my trade secrets, but anytime you boost the area that you really want to hear the low frequency on, in this case it's 102. Well, I meant 100, but I didn't get it perfectly. I almost always cut just above it. And what that does is it gives you that 100 hertz emphasis on the low frequency, but takes out the woofiness that would happen just above it. And it happens a lot. Take a listen. Without the cut, you hear how woofy that is? It's right here. And talk about a resonant peak. That is it. But almost, this is a real good technique. If you do boost your low frequency on anything, just above that, raise a peaking EQ and listen for where it's getting woofy. Right there. Wow, that's great. I'm getting the benefit of the 100 hertz without the woof that's just above it. I'm going to go back to my preset. And, not a bad idea. If you have a setting that you think is working but you want to mess with it, save it. So you can always get back quickly to what you had. Plus, if you have a second setting, you can AB them real quickly. Another thing, which is really great, put your cursor over the bypass button. It's not so much relevant here, but with compression it definitely is. Put your cursor over the bypass button, cycle a very short segment like a bar, close your eyes, click it on and off, bypass in, so you don't know which is which, and listen to one bar one way, click it in, listen to one bar another way, back to the first way, back to the second way, and you'll really get a very objective read very quickly as to whether you're doing something good or not. A lot of times you say, wow, I don't know if this is exactly the right thing. Is it helping? Close your eyes, cycle a short segment, put the cursor over the bypass button, close your eyes, hit cycle, and then kick it in and out, and very quickly you'll see, is this actually doing something that's desirable? Okay, let's move on. Time does fly. I can't tell. I don't think the slap is on the track. I'm hearing the stuff slap back off the bass. It's like 90 milliseconds. It's real funny. This is really driving the track, so I felt like it was kind of important. I used the Studer tape simulation across it. What I find, do you guys have any tape sims like this? UA stuff? Yeah, the ATR is pretty amazing. You know, it really focuses the mid-range very quickly, just like the physical version of it. The Studer brings up the low end and will warm things up and lop off some annoyingness in the attack transients. Again, you can choose a different tape formulation. I'm lucky that I come from tape days, and I know what these different tape formulations actually sound like, so I can go a little bit quickly. I think I had just gotten this UA compressor, and it's fairly transparent, so I was using it like that. Let's take the things off. With the tape, tightens it up, little tape compression, a little more compression to punch it up. Let's take a look at the envelope on the compressor just to see what we're doing. Actually, it's a pretty short attack and a auto release. I don't know. I just got the piece, so I was messing around with it. But again, this drives the track, and it's funny, now that I look at this mix, I did a lot less than I usually do. Things came together in a way where it seemed to be working, so I didn't mess with it. Bongo's bathroom, that was not helpful. I didn't use it. Again, with this kind of, let's see what we did for ambience here. Tom Room Short. Oh, you know what I did? This is actually that new Waves H, not new at the time, it was new, the H reverb. I was just trying different things. With something like this, I would go with a real fast room or even a non-linear to kind of give it that clacky, raucous thing, because you just want to get some excitement going with this. You know how the non-linear stuff tends to clatter, goes da 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 da. You hear periodicity in the reflections. We don't hear that in this, but let's see without the ambience. With it. Yeah, we're sort of getting a rebound off the reverb. I think there's some pre-delay on it, so that's pretty cool. All right, the snare is weird in this. It's almost like a dub snare where it's coming on 4. Let's take a listen. Wow, look at that. Slow attack, fast release. I want to really punch up the attack on the snare. Let's listen without it. Okay, we have a gain thing, so it's sounding real different. Let me raise the output so it kind of sounds the same. You can hear the difference in the attack, right? You guys can see when I'm bypassing and stuff. You can also hear that this is noisy as hell. Yeah, this was not recorded with a lot of care and an ear towards noise and stuff. Tracks are very noisy. If I feel like it's getting in the way of hearing things, I'll actually go through and cut it up, or gate it, or denoise it, something like that. But this track was raucous enough. You know, there's so much like kinetic energy in this track that really, I didn't think it was much of an issue. You know, I didn't do what I said, which was actually save the setting before I amended it, but that's fine. And let's look at the EQ on this. Okay, nothing here. Let's see, 3. Wow, look at that. I'm boosting at 620. What a weird area. But you know what? That's going to give a little body to the mid-range on the snare itself. Let's save that as snare 1, and let me show you what it's doing. That kind of pop gun thing, because there's no bottom on the snare, and there's enough competition in the high end that I really didn't want to boost up the high end that much. So I wanted to give it some punch, and this was a place where it seemed like, kind of sounds like a pop gun. Let's go back to what we had. Okay, there we go, thank you. And look at this, I'm actually pulling down 2500. Let's see what's there. That's why I'm pulling down to 2500. It's harsh as hell. And that's about it. Without the pull down of 2500, well, you know what? It sounds okay by itself, but part of my thinking is I need to leave room for other things. I don't want something having so much high frequency. And, you know, that'll get you into trouble. If you have one thing that's out of whack that has a lot of high end on it, you'll be chasing it through the mix with everything else. So I'm very wary of either harshness or spittiness in the high frequency on any one element. I usually try to get rid of things like that on individual elements, and then if I need it back later, I'll put it back. But if I had left this in, I would have been fighting that upper mid-range, trying to get everything else to stand up to that. Okay, let's see what else we got. Snare delay effects. Let's see what we did. I probably did a throw to the snare delay. Let's take a listen. Wow, that's kind of cool. Let's take a look and see what it is. Just making it a little more exciting in that build-up, and I automated my send. By the way, work in touch. Fuck those lines. Don't make little dots and move the lines. That's not musical. You know, you want to actually treat this like it's a musical instrument, and two things will happen if you work in touch. Number one, it'll have a lot better feel. Your moves will have a better feel because you're actually doing them. And number two, it's so much faster. And if you don't like what you did, Apple Z, and you just do it again. So try working in touch, and that's what I did with this. Now, let's see what happens at the end, though. It's kind of weird. You know, I wanted a crescendo kind of feeling at the end of the thing, so I just wrote the delay time and had a it's funny, it gets lower just before it gets higher. That may have just been a move of my hand that was not exact. Take a look at the time. Oh no, I went right? So I went low and then high. It's really a nice way to add some kinetic energy to the mixes to have your delays modulate like that. Okay. And it's on the lo-fi setting, and I probably have a lot of the high end rolled off. Guys, you don't want your delays to have the same tonal content as the dry thing. Why don't you just copy the dry thing? High frequency with delays is a no-no. I just don't like it at all. You know, the other thing that allows you to do is when you filter your delays and your reverbs, for that matter, if there's less high frequency content on those things, you focus on what you should be focusing on, which is the dry thing itself. You know, in a way, mixing is just like arranging, where you're legislating the listener's assignment of what's supposed to be on the primary level of interest, the secondary, the tertiary, quaternary, whatever, you know, and on and on. But that's really what you're doing. And again, it's exactly like arranging, where you're legislating for the listener how they're supposed to be perceiving those elements. And it's not the one that's on the fifth level that is imperceptible. No, it's just that it's on the fifth level of importance. And it assumes that proper level in terms of the arrangement and the track itself. Okay, snare long effects. I probably did a throw at some point. A throw, most of you know this, but a throw is when you send something to an ambience generator just for a moment. Let's see. Long effects. No. Let's see. Level, mute. Yeah, I did some throws here. So there were hits that were out in the open, so I figured it could use a long verb after that. Let's check this out. It's kind of cool. The reverb sounded like it was lowering in pitch at the end of it. I don't think that was intentional. Wow, that's interesting. You know, it's funny, I used to hate deverb. I go back a ways, you know, there wasn't a lot to use early on, but it's so trashy that I've really gotten to like it. Honestly, I find it very handy for kind of trashy small rooms that you want to splash out of like almost like a nonlinear. All right, let's check. Let's move on. The hi-hat loop. Now they gave me a hi-hat ambient track. Not that handy, but whatever. I had it in. But I did pan them out just to give the hat some width. Normally, it's not an issue. But again, there's not a lot going on in this track, so I really needed to fill up spaces. Without the ambience, let me go to an active part. With the ambient mic, gives it some side-to-side dimension. And let's see what we're doing EQ-wise. You know, not a lot. I'm basically getting rid of most of the low end. Oh, that's why. Can you hear all that other schmutz in there? Now with the high pass and the low frequency roll-off, it's just a lot cleaner. Again, if there's something that's non-essential, get rid of it. That stuff builds up in a track. And interestingly, I'm not boosting the high end. I'm actually, let me save this. I'm actually getting rid of some upper mid-range, 2300. That area is going to start to compete with other stuff real easily. And again, I guess my thought was I want to take away that competition. You know, early on in a mix, I really want to make sure that nothing is so loaded up at a particular frequency area that later on I'm going to have to keep boosting everything else in that area. So again, I think I talked about this early on, trying to take away the frequency anomalies in a particular instrument. Oh, and Devil Lock. Oh, I love this thing. Total trash. You guys use this? At first I was like, oh, I can't use that. You know, it's just too severe. And now I'm like, oh, I gotta have it. I gotta have it. And I believe I did this just to really up the excitement factor on the hat. Let's listen without it. Oh my God. Yeah. Now, fast release, again, for the reasons I said before. If this is a rhythmically accurate part and it's compressing, I want it to come back up to unity gain before that next attack. Sound Toys, I love you. If you're listening, the mix control is nice, but there needs to be an output level control on this thing. Because as soon as you start to put in this a little bit with the mix control, it seems louder. I don't know if it actually is, but it sounds louder. And the only way you can make an accurate reference as to whether something sounds better or not is to have it as the same volume. You guys know this. Psychoacoustically, if one thing is even a little bit louder than the other, and you play both of them, you will think that the louder one sounds better. So if they had an overall output level control on this, I'd be really happy about it. I don't know if you guys use this, but you'll find that with the mix control, as soon as you start to mix in any of the super crushed signal from this compressor, it's louder right away. But definitely adds the excitement value, right? A lot of schmutz in there. I can hear, it sounds like the guy's, I don't know, dropped his phone or something. Right? It sounds like he dropped it on the tom. All right, claps. Let's take a listen. And guys, anytime I have multiple elements that are making up one sound, I bust them to a single fader, whether it's stereo or mono. Makes your life a lot easier. You'll get faster at it. It won't take any time. And it just gives you a lot more control over the thing. And again, if you want to make it brighter, you don't have to worry about making one part brighter and then the other part brighter. You can make both things brighter. Okay, so left claps right and claps left. Now, I have pitch and nonlinear on this. I'll tell you, a really great use of pitch plugins is to make claps sound fuller, okay? And generally, you don't want to go higher. You want to go lower. You know, it's funny, coming up for years, learning how to EQ a clap, I always thought, oh, wow, you make it sound better if you add some upper mids or high frequency to it. No, the chunk of a clap is down in the mid-range. It's really that chonk, chonk, not the cack, cack. So pitch shift really helps that out and makes them sound bigger. Without it, with it, you know, and again, I went lower with it just to, you know, sound like manly claps. But that's what you want out of something like this. I'm joking. But I want this chunk, chunk, chunk. I want a real big feel on that. And then the nonlinear, let's take, generally they get a little clanky or clattery, nonlinear reverbs for percussive stuff. You can almost hear them go ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, like a zipper effect. But in this case, I wanted to make the track sound as raucous and as energy-filled as possible. Let's take a listen. With it. Without it. With it. You know, that's the nonlinear reverb. It's really kind of tanky, but it seemed appropriate. And I think what I said at the beginning, there wasn't a lot going on in this track, so I really figured that I had to sort of up the excitement and raucous level of the thing just to make the track come off, and that nonlinear really helps. Without it, with it, kind of tanky, kind of metallic, but again, I think it works in the context of the track. There's a plate, but I think it only sends every once in a while. Let's see. Actually, you know what? I didn't use it, which I should have taken it off, but I didn't use it. All right, let's keep on going. Shaker. And this is a case where this track was really noisy, so you see what I did? There's still noise in there. And again, I sent this to a, sounds like a plate. I have it labeled as room, but it sounds like a plate to me. By the way, name your buses and your sends immediately. Like, this was a really big thing. I think it was in Pro Tools 10 where you can right-click. You know, if you have something right here, you right-click on it and you can rename it. Hello? It's not doing it. Let me option. Huh. That's weird. But as soon as you assign something, you know, say you have your bus 12 sending to one of your reverbs, name it immediately. It makes your life a lot easier. You no longer have to think, oh, which bus was sending? You know, that was really rugged. Oh, is it bus 12 that's going to that vocal reverb? And you'd scroll up and down the page. No, this is real nice that you can name the stuff right away. Let's take a tom low extra. Every once in a while, there's a big tom. Let's take a listen. And what I did was, he says gong, 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 right? So I thought it'd be kind of cool to have gong, gong. You know, have the thing pan. Let's take a listen. I can't hear it up here. It's going like that, or did I actually miss the move? It should be panning. I don't hear it that much. Again, just to give it a little more kinetic nature, you know, be careful of wildly panning elements. They become very distracting very quickly, and especially if they're groove elements, they can actually take away from the groove. They can diminish it. Yeah, you know, panning elements I tend to use, especially with auto panners and Sound Toys makes Pan Man, which is really cool. I tend to use that to give some movement to pads and harmonic instruments that may be somewhat static. And it's a great vibe thing, too. Let's see what we're doing here EQ-wise. Wow, look at that. You know what? I didn't do my my high pass like that, but I will now. I'm boosting up a 118, and then I'm cutting. I'm cutting in the mid-range. Again, normally what I do. Can you guys see up here? Normally I would have gone just higher than this and pulled it down, so I didn't get the woof part of that happening. And let's take a look at the. And I have a feeling I did this again to enhance the attacks. Without it, with it. There's a little more snap, crackle, pop, particularly on the second hit. And again, at the beginning, I was talking about using compression for envelope modification, and that's it. You got to be careful because it will get spitty, meaning that if you enhance the attack portion of the percussive element too much, it will get very fatiguing to the listener after a while. And it'll start to, what happens with a lot of percussive attack transients that come at your ears tend to shut down to protect themselves. I don't know if you guys ever listened to something that's very percussively oriented with a lot of activity with very fast transients. After about 2 minutes of that, you'll stop hearing so much detail in the audio because your ears tend to shut down. And that's about the only time I would use a fast attack on something, is to take away that spittiness at the beginning of the signal. And look, I use the Manny American reverb. Manny, I've known Manny. I worked at the Enterprise a lot in LA in the 90s, and Manny was my assistant. He'll do well one of these days. Do you guys know? I mean, he's really huge now. It's great. He's a really sweet guy, too. But I must have just gotten this, and I thought, OK, let me try it and see what it sounds like. I tend to go, with my more conventional stuff, I tend to go to the same pieces a lot, especially with reverbs and delays, just because I know what I'm going to get. And working at a reasonable speed is something that you have to do. Things are much better than they used to be. You know, imagine working on an analog mix with 64 tracks in a real studio with a big console, that anytime you wanted to isolate something and EQ it or prepare it, you had to keep rewinding it. Play, play, gong, 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 gong. You know, it's a lot faster to work now in the digital realm. It's really one of the nice things. All right, let's see. Background vocals. Okay, you know, there's a reason we're not hearing that. Because I have my masters over here. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Get into a standard routing thing where you end up having one fader for each instrumental group. It'll make your life a lot easier. In fact, Andrew Sheps, who's a real brainy guy, apparently has a mix template set up. And I should do this myself because I kind of do the same things each time, where he has all that stuff set up in a template. And when he gets a new session, he just imports that bus and I/O structure into the new session. So he already has a drum bus, he already has a bass bus, he already has a guitar bus set up. Background master.
I've been away. I've been away.
Very unlike me. I don't do shit like that much. But it's kind of cool. Let's see where they are.
I've been away. I've been away.
You ever find that with big sessions? You end up scrolling up and down the session to find what you're listening to. All right, let's listen again.
I've been away.
Again, I used a throw on this, and I did it via a mute rather than level. Now, this is the kind of stuff that's actually kind of hard sometimes to do in touch, because sometimes the latency on your system is such that your moves will always be a little bit late.
I've been away.
You guys use H delay? Yeah, trashy as hell, right? It's great. Echo Boy also, just because it's so adaptable and you can do so much with it so quickly. But yeah, so let's take a look at this.
I've been away. I've been away.
I wonder why I only did it on the first one.
I've been away. I've been away.
Oh, I did it on every other one. Yeah, it would have gotten kind of dumb. I've been away, 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 away. I've been away, 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 away. There's a little back and forth to it now where it's not happening all the time. Let's see what else we did on these guys. Background vocal 2. That's funny that I did so little processing to the individual elements, but I did most of it in the group on the background. So let's take a look. Wow, look at that. I'm cutting some of the mid-range and upper mid-range. Again, the idea is I just didn't want a lot of competition in that area. Let me save this setting, BG1. Let's take a listen. Let's bypass it.
I've been away.
Okay, now you know why I cut the upper mid-range. Harsh as hell, right?
I've been away.
Yuck. With it?
I've been away.
Much better. And in fact, we could actually do well by cutting a little 300. I'm hearing a little bit of buildup down here. You know, what ends up happening is if this is loaded up in the 2500 range, which is that kind of brassy nails on a blackboard thing, if we pull that down, there may have not sounded like there was too much 200 or 300 there before, but now that we've changed the tonal balance, it's going to sound woofy because we've changed the proportion of the different frequencies in the sound. So let's listen again.
I've been away.
Yeah, that's the area where now that I listen to the mix, I'm like, okay, I could pull that back a little bit.
I've been away.
Again, you know, I'm not after bigness in this. I'm actually after definition and having it sit into the track. You know, if you take bigness usually comes in the bottom. That's where something will sound big, but you got to be real careful because you can't have everything sounding real big. And let's take a look at the compression.
I've been away.
Not doing much, just really controlling the peaks.
I've been away. I've been away. I've been away.
Cool. I love that it's like a dub track now. I really like it with the drums and the background vocals. Guys, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here.
All right, Bob, Fist Club.